Well, welcome everyone to our 5th Best Practices webinar. It's amazing we've come through to 5 of these already. We kind of had a slow start to get going on these, but I think we've got some momentum going here, and it's nice that we're already in our fifth session. So this will be our pre-harvest session, and we probably won't see us for a little while. We'll take a little bit of a hiatus through harvest, but we'll come back in November or December. I'm not sure, we haven't finalized that, but we'll, in all of our spare time, we will after our hiatus, we'll come back with even a better, more comprehensive look to best practices, I think. So welcome everyone. And Jeff Franklin will start things off with his regular weather update. Then we've got some real experts here on grape analysis and everything. So that's going to be really nice to see, because it's really important, I think, to get a handle on what's happening there, not only with the look and everything, but not only with your refractometer, but to get all the numbers and see if those grapes really can make good wine. So I think it's a great session. So take it away.
Okay, so let me just get my presentation set up here. Okay, so assume that you're all looking at my presentation slide. I'd say wave your arms if you're not, but I'm sure Steve or somebody will tell me if this goes off track. So thanks for having me again. This is the 5th best practice I've been able to talk about weather, something I'm quite passionate about. Happy to share my observations and data with all of you. So I'm going to start actually by talking a little about phenology, and then we'll transition into looking at some of the weather data that we've accumulated. So these observations all taken from our research vineyard, about a hectare of grapes we have behind the Kempel Research Station. And just to kind of show you where we are, and these samples we actually took today. So they're pictures from left to right, our Marquette here, Vidal here, very nice looking clusters, and of course L'Acadie. So today our Marquette came at 21.9 bricks. That's the highest value certainly we've ever had since we've been growing Marquette. Our Vidal at 15.8, again, quite surprised that it was that high. Vidal tends to lag a bit and takes a while to accumulate its sugars. And our L'Acadie Blanc came in at 18.2. So these are, we're considering these to be fairly advanced values. Of course, last year we were nowhere close to this. In fact, last year Marquette never made it above 20 in our vineyard. It may have been some other vineyards. And I'm not even sure if our Vidal made it to 16 last year. So, you know, we're talking a month and a half ahead of when we would have taken those fauna values and harvested last year. So definitely in good shape. And so along with the sugars, so if you look at these two graphs, sugars and total acidity. So the sugar graph is actually broken down into 2 different colored bars for 2 different sampling dates. The blue bar was exactly 1 week ago, or the 9th of September. And the reddy orange bars are from today. So you can see where our range of varieties are that we've chosen for this. Everything has increased in the last week, which is a good sign. Sugars are still going up. We know that at this time of year, sugars, the fruit isn't the only sink for sugars. We also see that the wood itself is ripening, because the wood has to store carbohydrates in a form of sugars to help it, and the buds to help it get through the winter. And at some point, the plant will stop accumulating sugar in the fruit and transition to storing it all in the wood. Of course, that hasn't happened yet, and we can still see the increases over last week's values. Again, really, really good values for everything, well ahead of last year, and even our Riesling, which today came in at around 14, very high value, we feel, for this time of year. But the other side of the story is, of course, over here on the right-hand side, the total acidity. And we can see here that we're not quite ready yet for harvest in all varieties. If you look at that 1% total acidity line, as you know, you want to be below that before you do any harvest. We have 2 varieties, L'Acadie and New York Muscat, that are both below that. We'll probably let our Lackady go a little bit lower before we harvest, but I have a feeling next week, late next week, we'll be starting to harvest those. Of course, the higher acidity values are in our Riesling and our Vidal Blanc. That's typical for this time of year. But the one that's quite surprising, we have Marquette at 20, almost 22 bricks, but a total acidity, as you can see here, of, our Marquette at a total acidity of over 1.5, and that's quite a high value. We'd hope to be able to harvest Marquette fairly soon, but we're going to have to wait a bit. So that's kind of where we are in a research video. Now let's talk about how we got there. So this is the typical temperature graph that I've shown for all of our sessions. So the black dots would be the daily mean average temperature for 2020, the actual daily values that we observed for average daily temperature. And I've plotted those all along here. The gray line that you see that runs through those is the 10-year trend line. So we took the 10-year averages, we ran a trend line through that, and that gray line is my best estimate of what we should expect to see on a given day of the year for temperature. And as you can see, we started off this year in May, much cooler than average. Early June, we started to get some heat, but we had some cycling temperatures. And then we transitioned into this beautiful, well above average summer time, where virtually all of our observations are above that expected average trend line. And we stayed that way for almost the whole summer. But the pattern, the meteorological pattern that gives us that actually broke up a little early this year. The last week of August, we started to see temperatures start to cycle a bit. And when you see cycling temperatures, like we see at this time of the year, that's a sign that we're at the end of the sort of what I'll call the meteorological summer in Nova Scotia. And so we had I think a low this morning of 5.2 degrees here in Kentville. We have some forecast lows of around 2 to 3 degrees on the weekend, and that's going to be in contrast to some nights this weekend when we'll also have low temperatures that will be in the mid-teens. So it's that cycling pattern. It's not that all the heat is gone, it's that heat is going to be broken up with periods of cooler weather. And the other thing that I always find interesting at this time of year, and this really marks the end of the meteorological summer, we have this fairly low range variance between temperatures, between daily temperatures that we see all through the summer. But at some point when that starts to break down and we start to see this variance creep up again, that's definitely a sign that fall weather is on the way. We see the same trend in the spring where we have these wide-ranging temperatures. We just don't have the stability that we had in the summer. And that brings with it a lot of headaches, and we'll talk about some of those headaches as I move along here. So one of the net results of having these higher than average temperatures is that we have higher than average growing degree days. And growing degree days we use that as a proxy for measuring development in grapes and virtually all crops. Using a base of 10 for grapes. As you can see here, the thick red line is the 2020 accumulated growing degree days. So a couple interesting things here. One is we started dead last below every year in this analysis, and we've ended up in first place for most of the summer. And really, we're just kind of tied with 2018 for the total amount of heat that we've accumulated. And we bump back and forth. Sometimes 2018's ahead, sometimes 2020's ahead. But you probably don't remember 2018 as a great growing year, mainly because that was the year of the freeze we had on June 4th. So we never really got to see what the impact of such a warm summer would be on a normal cropping season. But this year we're getting to see that. So have a good idea of what the potential is, especially in some of our vinifera varieties, to have enough heat to get those to as close as we can to full maturity. So I'll also show you here, in contrast, this blue line on the bottom is 2019. That's where we were last year. And we were just discussing this before we started the session. Of course, our sugar values last year, nothing that I know of went over 20 bricks. And that's largely because of that late development, slow development, and that berry ripening phase happening too late in the year. So along with above average temperatures, higher than average growing degree days, we've had below average precipitation. Again, the 2020 data is shown here in the red line, the thick red line. And as you can see, we've been trending below the average. The average is the black line, thick black line here in the middle. That's the 10-year average. And we've been trending below that average all season long, right from the 1st of January. We had less than average snowfall, we had less than average spring rains, and we've definitely had less than average rain in the summer. And also, what you can see here, although we have had some rain, I mean, I look outside, my lawn is still green. It's still green here in Kentville. Most of our events have come in these very discrete, fairly large events. In fact, we had a long stretch that goes from early July well into August. You know, that's the better part of a month right there, where we had almost no rain. And that's when everybody noticed that things were happening. And I think, along with the heat, it's this lack of moisture that's given us the degree of phenology that we have right now. So I'm just going to quickly put some numbers on this as my time is burning up. So we're definitely on track to exceed 1,200 growing degree days. Our mean daily high temperature for June, July, August, 25.1. That's a full degree ahead of the 10-year average. Same thing with our mean low temperatures. For June, July, and August of 2020, 14.3. That's a full degree ahead of the 10-year average. Our accumulated precipitation, 235 millimeters. But as I say, some of you may roll your eyes when you see that number. For one thing, that's what we experienced right here in Kentville. And we know that there, if I just go a little bit farther to the north, maybe over as far as Steve's, they probably didn't see that much because we got a lot of that in thunder showers in the summer. But still, even with that, that's below the 292 millimeters, which is the 10-year average. So that's sort of all the good news. Less than average precipitation, higher than average temperatures. But of course, you know, what's coming up here? So this is Environment Canada's seasonal forecast. They put out one of these every month, and they look ahead 3 months in advance. And all season long, we have been in this, and I'll point out where we are here if it's not clear to you. So this is Nova Scotia right here. And we're in this either this brick red or this dark red color. And that's an indication of somewhere between 80 to 100% probability of an above average temperature for those next 3 months. So what this is telling us is that for September, October, November, the Environment Canada's best prediction is that we're going to be above average in temperature, 80–90% chance of that. That doesn't mean that there will be no low temperatures. We know that temperatures are cycling right now, but overall, when we look at the averages, we should be above the average. Again, all good news, all things that we want to hear. That gets us all through the harvest window. But of course, what we have to be mindful of this time of year is also the risk of frost. So this is sort of the last weather data slide I'm going to show you. It takes a minute or so to explain this. So if you look at this, this dark red line here, this is it's called a density function, or really what it is, it just shows you the occurrence of all these various temperatures. The temperatures are down here on the horizontal or on the x-axis. So this shows you what the occurrences of each one of these temperatures has been for the 15 days from the 15th of September to the 30th, from 1980 to present. So 40 years times 15 days. That's how many temperature observations are in this. And here I'm just looking at the minimum temperatures, and because I really want to get at what's the probability that we're going to get a very low temperature, maybe a frost. So if you look at this, the average that most of our temperatures are in around the 9 degree, which is the average for this time of year. We have a few that are up in the 20s, but a few are also down here below zero. And if you look at the 40-year data, there's about 1% of our observations for the next 2 weeks fall below zero. But if you want to realize, if you want to convert that into the probability that I'm going to have frost at any given time, so it ends up being about a 10% chance of a hard frost in that period from September 15th to 30th, based on what we've observed historically over the last 40 years. So that's not great news. 10% is a reasonably significant chance. And remember, we only have to have one of these events in that time frame for there to be damage to the leaves. And largely that's the issue we're talking about. If our leaves get damaged by frost, if we lose our leaves, then we can't accumulate any more sugars. Then if we look beyond the September 30th period, we go on to October 15th. So we look at the full month period from September 15th to October 15th. We have a 66% chance of having a hard frost. Again, looking historically over the last 40 years. And it's been my observation since we've been working in grape here, that's how the grape season ends in Nova Scotia. At some point, usually early October, sometimes later, we get a hard frost, we lose our leaves, and the maturation timing of the fruit is over. So just in summary, because I'm right up against my 15 minutes here. So we started with showing bud burst and flowering. We made it to veraison earlier this year than we have in the last few years. Started, between somewhere in the second week of August. That for us in our vineyard continued on till about the 7th of September. That's when our last few berries of Riesling made it past that veraison period. And now we're into this rapidly accumulating sugars and decreasing acids phase of berry ripening. And of course, we're always hopeful that we get through this, we get our acids down where we want them, our sugars up where we want them, and we make it to this very last stage, which is where we get our good flavor compounds, the things that make our wines characteristic. So that's all I have. I'll pause for questions if there's some time here.
Yes, we have time for questions. Thank you very much for the nice presentation and for the explanation of the parameters.
Thank you.
To the attendees, I would like to remind you that we have an icon of Q&A. So if you want to make a question, please you can write it there. There you can ask and we can discuss with Jeff. We have time for a couple of questions. Jeff, so at the beginning you were talking about the varieties in the vineyard at the research station. Which one were the first one and which one were the last one to reach veraison?
So we noticed, I think it was somewhere around the 7th to the 10th of August. I'd have to go back and look at my records. And that's when we saw the first signs of Marquette beginning to go through veraison. And then it proceeded through Marquette, through l'Acadie, New York Muscat followed that. And then after that, it would have been Vidal, and Riesling was the very last. And that September 7th, that marks the point where the last Riesling berries that we observed made it through veraison and started into the rapid sugar accumulation phase. So that's a full month of veraison across those range of varieties.
Yeah, it's a long time. So you were mentioning also that you're planning to start harvesting at the end of next week. So which variety and which?
I think the only variety that we can consider, and we still have to take another Brix measurement, another acidity measurement, would be the l'Acadie. We have some. We harvest largely because we have experiments going on, so we try to harvest at the standard time based on the on sugars and acids. But I'd like to see the acids get down 0.8, 0.75 in that range before we harvest our l'Acadie. I thought our Marquette harvest was probably fairly close, but looking at these acids today, that's at least 2 weeks away. Our New York Muscat, actually, looking at its acidity, may be harvested before our Marquette. The acids are dropping quite quickly in that variety.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Jeff, to explain us how it looks everything at the vineyard at the research station and how you are making the connection with the different parameters, because the growing degree days, the precipitation, the temperature, and the comparison, especially with the last two seasons, is very important to see and have the whole picture. Thank you. So now continue and link of what Jeff already presented right now. I would like to invite Neslihan Ivit to explain us a little bit more about the parameters in the ripeness of the grapes for winemaking. Neslie, please.
I'm sharing my screen here.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neslihan. I am winemaking and innovation specialist with Perennia. And today I will be talking about grape ripening parameters, which are important for harvest decisions and for winemaking. Let's begin with the grape, and let's ask the question, actually, what's happening during grape ripening inside of each berry? Of course, the most important phenomenon of the ripening is the rapid accumulation of the sugar. The main sugars in the berries are glucose and fructose, and they both localize mainly in the pulp in the berry. And it continues with the acids, and the variation of the acids during the ripening period. And the main acids are tartaric acid and the malic acid. Actually, both of these acids are in the berries. They are accumulated before in veraison. And when it comes to the veraison, tartaric acid and malic acid actually behaves differently. While your tartaric acid will stay mostly constant from veraison to the ripening, the malic acid will start to decrease. And for that reason, malic to tartaric ratio, it's one of the ratios that can be used for the maturity ripeness level, because it will depend on the maturity level, and as also it will depend on your grape variety. And the other important phenomenon happening are the minerals. The amount of minerals in the grape change during the ripening period. And one of the most important one is the potassium. The potassium will increase depending on the sugar accumulation in the grape. And of course, there are other minerals will change their amount during this period, like calcium, magnesium, and other metal trace elements and anions as well. And a small part here, I put the cell wall. Of course, there will be some changes in the cell wall as well. That will be mainly the degradation of the pectin in the cell walls, and simply put, it will soften the skin of the berry. And that's not everything. We also have some nitrogen compounds that are changing their amount in the berry. And towards the end of maturity, actually half of the nitrogen compounds in the vegetative part of the plant will be translocated in the berries. And then it comes to phenolic compounds, which are very important, especially for red varieties. And the main phenolic compounds, if the interest in the wine, will be tannins and anthocyanins. Simply put, the tannins will be giving the final wine the texture in the mouth, and anthocyanins will be responsible from the color. And how they behave during ripening period also is important. Tannins will be already high before the veraison, and from veraison to ripening, they will continue their increase until they reach a maximum point. Anthocyanins will do the same, but they will basically come to a maximum point, and then they will start to decrease. So for most of the red wines, it will be important to catch that maximum point before actually they start to decrease. And it's also good to mention that tannins, they will be in the skin of the grapes as well as in the seeds of the grapes, and they will behave differently. While the tannins in the skin will increase, the tannins in the seeds will be decreasing, which will be also an important thing for the wine, because the seed tannins will be more astringent, and then it will give more astringent to the final wine as well. And then finally, it will be increasing aromatic compounds. There are many different aromatic compounds in the wine that give, in the grape, that will give the final aromatics to the grape. And there are different classes, and there are in different forms. But what is important here to know is they will basically increase during the maturation period, and there are also some exceptions to that, but they will mostly increase, and some of them will be in the free form, some of them will be in bond form or pre-fermentative form, and then they will all be finishing their increase during this period. So those are all the things happening during grape ripening period. After telling all these, it's kind of obvious that there are many things happening at the same time, but they are not necessarily happening at the same speed. So that's why there are different concepts to define the maturity. And it's also hard to define the maturity because it will also change depending on the final objective that you have, depending on the style of the wine that you want to make, you will be able to define different levels of maturity. But simply put, I put some of the concepts here just to mention those. The first one is the physiological ripeness. That will be basically the ripeness of the seeds of the grape, because the final objective of the grapevine is to it will be propagate itself. So that's why it's preparing the seeds, but that physiological ripeness will not be an interest of enologists, since our final objective is making wine. And then it comes to phenolic ripeness. The phenolic ripeness will be mostly the amount of tannins and anthocyanins in the wine. And that will come together with the cell wall ripeness, because the amount of tannins and anthocyanins that you have in your grape, it doesn't mean that all of them will pass to the wine. It will only pass to wine when the skin of the grape gets in a certain level. Simply put, they will be extracted more when the skin of the grape is more ripe. So that is that both parameters will go together. And aromatic ripeness, of course, it will be when the desired aromatic accumulation is reached. Again, it will be depending on the type of the wine that you would like to produce. And that is also possible to measure with the certain compounds and with the certain aromatic character that they will give to the wine. It's possible to measure all these for them during the ripening period. And then it comes the sensory ripeness. That would be an easier concept to track, and that can be also even done in the field. It's basically tasting the grapes and evaluating its characteristics, sensory characteristics. And you would there are many different protocols on how to do that, but what you would basically do is tasting the skin and the pulp, and defining the sweetness, acidity, and perceived maturity in that berry. And finally, it will come the technological ripeness. That would be the ripeness that is used traditionally. The main parameters that we would follow here would be the acid and sugar accumulation. And those concepts are very, some of them you can even use one, the technological ripeness, or depending on the final objective that you have in the winemaking, you can also integrate these other concepts like the sensory or aromatic, or for the red wine, mostly the phenolic ripeness as well. So they can be used very frequently. And after giving all these, here I listed them grape ripening parameters. Those are all the parameters that you would get once you send your grapes to Alab. And those of you who already sent the samples last year will recognize the parameters, and also we'll see that there are some new additions to that list. That will be important for you to track all these parameters and tracking tracking your maturity. I will just go very quickly on each of these parameters, which I already mentioned most of them. So Brix, of course, all of you are already measuring Brix. And you will have the Brix values, but just a small remark in that, that will, coming from a certain maturity, you will have a more accurate Brix values, because before a certain maturity, there are other compounds in the grape, such as organic acid, that can interfere with the Brix results. So it might not be very precise until coming a certain level of maturity. That's basically around 15 Brix. And for that reason, you have also the specific gravity, and you also have your glucose and fructose, which, as I mentioned, there are your main sugars, fermentable sugars in the wine, which will be important for the potential alcohol level. For the terry, just a simple put, that will give you how much alcohol you would have in your wine, but it would, again, there are some other parameters that can affect the yeast and other fermentation parameters, but generally a general number as used as 17 grams of sugar would give you a degree of potential alcohol in your wine. And the next parameter you would get would be your yeast assimilable nitrogen, your YAN. That is basically all the type of nitrogens that can be used by the yeast for the fermentation process. And those will be a very good indication for the winemaker, because if there is not enough YAN before the fermentation, they can make necessary additions to that. And that would be important for the complete fermentation. And finally, that the other parameter that you would get would be potassium. As I mentioned, the potassium is one of the most important minerals during the maturation, and that would give you how much the berry intakes in the potassium. That is also important for the wine because it would affect your pH, and the pH of the must will be very important for the microbiological stability of the wine, and it will also affect the color as well. And then we have on the other side, we have all the acidity parameters. You have your pH. Again, it's a measure of the acid and the cations in the wine. You have your total acidity, which will be sum of all the acids, inorganic and organic acid in your wine. Here, I saw that Jeff Franklin used percentage, but from Alab, you will be receiving them in gram per liter, and they will be expressed as tartaric acid. It's just a way to measure it differently. And you will also be getting this year your tartaric acid and malic acid, which will be again important for you to track those two acids and get more info in that, which is a very useful tool. And finally, you will get your volatile acidity as well, which will not be your concern with your sound grapes. Definitely, you will have negligible amounts of volatile acidity with the healthy grapes. So those will be all the parameters for the ripening. And I just want to wish all the growers a happy harvest. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and feel free to contact me at nivit@perenia.ca. And if you have any questions, I don't know if we have time to that, I can also answer those. Thank you.
Thank you, Neslihan, for your presentation, the explanation. Again, we have a couple of minutes for some questions. So if people wants to ask something, we have the Q&A button below. Neslihan, you explained something about sensory analysis, how you evaluate through sensory analysis. You pay attention to pulp, skin, seeds. Could you explain a little bit, please?
Yeah, so the important thing, first of all, you would kind of, when you starting to taste your berries, you would kind of see how easy they can be taken from the bunch. That would be the first thing that you would be paying attention. And then You could kind of see their softness by your hand as well. And then what I would suggest to taste all the parts differently. When you're tasting the pulp, you would see your sweetness and acidity. And then after that, you would come to the skin, where you would also chew it and then see what are, how the skin aromas in there, if there's any greenness in there, and that type of thing. You could also check the seeds, which are, again, I said not very interested, but you really want them to not to very interfere with their astringency, in case in some of the winemaking techniques you can break them. And so that's why you really want them mature as well in some cases. So you would also check the seeds. So that would be a complete tasting. But again, there are some different protocols in the literature, and it can be followed depending on that. And I would suggest to do that if there will be some good tracking every year. It can be good for the records of a grower.
Thank you, Neslihan. So the idea is to don't be perfect tasting, but to have like main points and to try to figure out and having notes.
Yeah, sure. If it's done in the field, it's quite challenging to make like a proper tasting, but it's good to kind of keep track in a way that you can follow over the years.
Okay. Thank you, Neslihan.
No.
I think due to the time, I will stop here. Thank you very much. So now I would like to give the screen to Hayley to complement a little bit more the two topics previously speaking and presenting. Hayley.
Francisco, and hi everybody. I'm Hayley. I am the manager and technician at Alab, so I kind of run the show there. So if you haven't met me before, I am the person who will likely be coming out to meet you to get your grapes when you drop them off at Alab. So I thought tonight we'd just go quickly through how I would like to see your samples coming to me. I don't know if you've discussed with Francisco about sampling techniques in your vineyard before, so we'll just touch on that. And then what you can expect from me. So what I'd like to do is I'll just show you the sample submission form that I have. If I can find it here. There we go. This is the sample submission form that is listed on the Alab website. So if you're on the Alab website and you click on the wine and cider box at the top, that's going to take you to our wine and cider page. You can see all of the options for the analyses that you can have on your grapes, or if you're in the process of making wine, what you can have done on your finished wine when you've got your product ready to bottle, or if you want to test anything midway. There's lots of choices for you, so that would be great. So at the top of the screen, and what I want to show you here is the information that I need from you. When you drop off your samples, I'm going to have a bunch of samples coming in from different people, so I need to keep things straight. So please make sure that your sample forms are filled out completely. So I need to know your name, the vineyard or the winery that you are growing for, the email address that I am sending the results to, and if you want more than one email copied on that, just list them all, or you can use the backside of the page. Just make note of that. I know some vineyards are asking that their growers get their wines or their grapes tested, so I'm going to send results to both the grower and the winery. And then another email address as to who the invoice goes to when all is said and done. I invoice at the beginning of the subsequent month. So you'll see an invoice for September at the beginning of October, an address, and then a phone number in case I need to get in touch with you if a label falls off a bag, something like that. So as we're an academic institution, we also like to know if we can collect some data and use it anonymously for future purposes. So I may use this for research. We employ co-op students in the lab, so they may use some anonymized data for their co-op report later in the semester. And also on that note, I'm just going to plug the Industry and Community Engagement Department at Acadia just a little bit. They're there to help do research for the greater population. So if you have a burning research question and would like to partner up with somebody potentially at Acadia, you can get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with the lovely people at Industry and Community Engagement, and they can probably help you out. There's lots of funding sources for starting up projects. So if you've got something that you kind of want to know or solve over the course of a couple months, we can probably get that sorted out for you. All right, back to the sample form. The next thing is you can agree to or disagree to have your results also released to Nestlé. So we have a partnership with Perennia where Nestlé is able to do results interpretation for the data that I generate from your samples. So she's a great resource to get in touch with. I like to use the analogy that if you go to the doctor's office and they send you off for a blood test, the lab technician takes a sample, will do the blood test, and then they send the results back to the doctor, and that doctor is the person who does the interpretation and tells you what to do. So I'm that lab technician, and Nestlé is my doctor equivalent. So we'll go with that. I know a bunch about some grapes, but I am not an expert, so she is the definite good resource to go to, and then she can also liaise with Francisco and get you some answers to the questions you might have about the results that you get. So when you take samples, I would like about 200 grapes in a Ziploc bag or a very well-tied bag. So that doesn't mean just give me 1 or 2 clusters of grapes. Please go out for a walk in your vineyard and you're gonna walk down your rows and you're gonna sample berries from different clusters. You're gonna take them from the top. You're gonna take them from the bottom. You're gonna take them from the sunny side. You're gonna take them from the shady side. So I want a good representative sample. It doesn't have to be 200 on the dot. If you lose count and it's a couple over, a couple under, that's okay. What I need is to be able to press your grapes and get about 100 or so mils of juice so that I have sufficient sample to test with. So that's the important thing. And particularly if you got smaller grapes, the more the better because they're teeny and they produce less juice sometimes. So that's what I'd like to see. The bottom section is for me to fill out. And the back section on page 2 is where I'd like you to write what you're giving me. So if you're giving me more than one sample, I'd like to know what the variety is. If you've got different vineyards that you're bringing together, different plots or whatever, that information goes on this back page here. And then you're going to tick off the rapid analysis, which is the one, oh no, pardon me, the grape ripening box here. It's a $25 analysis, and that gets you all of the parameters that Nestlé listed in her talk before. So I will give you a results report for that. And then you can see a couple other things. Not all of the things are going to be applicable to grapes. I do tests for total anthocyanins and total polyphenols. So if you are interested in those tests, we can do them on grape juice. You'll get the results expressed in for total polyphenols. You'll get those expressed as gallic acid equivalents. And if you're doing anthocyanins, it would be malvidin 3-glycoside or glucoside equivalents. So we can do those tests for you too. They're just not included in the grape ripening package. And that's pretty much it. Like I need those first 2 pages completed. And so what you're gonna do is when you have your samples, you're gonna have your grapes in your Ziploc or well-closed bag. You're gonna label that bag and then you're gonna either bring it to me at Acadia. So we are located at 6th University Avenue. We're actually the second door on the first building on the hill, which is the David Hustis Innovation Pavilion. So what you're gonna do is, my phone number is listed on the sample submission form. The Acadia campus is still closed to the public. So what happens is you're gonna need to drive up, pull over in front of the building and call me from your car, and I will come down and meet you at your car wearing my mask. And we can do a little exchange. You can hand over your sample form, I'll double check it. You can hand me your grapes, and then I'll go upstairs and do the sample analysis. And for those of you who asked from last year, I have considered strongly and I'm gonna do it. So I live in Centerville, just east of the intersection of the 359 and the 221. So I'm across from Ellsworth Estate. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna put a cooler out on my front porch area. And you can, before 8 a.m., you can put your grape samples in that cooler and I'll bring them into the lab with me for the day. So what I'll do is I'll send a little picture of the house and instructions to Steve or Neslihan Francisco, and we can distribute those to our GGANS members. So for anybody who wants to drop their samples off in Centerville, they need to be here before 8 a.m. on a weekday. I'm not coming into the lab on the weekends, so only weekdays. I'm happy to bring them in with you. But please keep in mind that there will potentially be other people dropping their samples in there. So if you could put everything in one outer bag, so your sample form and whatever grape samples you have, tie them up in a bag so it's not going to get jumbled up with somebody else's samples, that would be best, because your grapes are going to look a lot like somebody else's grapes, and I want to make sure everybody gets the right results. So I think that's it. So page 3 and 4 just has what analyses are available and what are encompassed in each of the packages on the second page. Yeah, I think that is almost all of the things that I had on my list. I got the first grape samples from Nova Scotia today, so that was kind of exciting. So happy harvest, everybody. And now begins the roller coaster. And I think that's it. I think, Nestle, if you have anything that you feel I missed, just shout out and I will go back and cover those things. Thank you. And if there are any other questions about sample delivery or how the results look, I should have thought to make up a fake sample or results report so I could show you, but you'll just get everything in a PDF from me. With the list of the grape that you gave me, whatever name that you put on your sample form is what I'll use in the columns for your results. And then you'll have all of the parameters that are there with their units, the date that they were analyzed. You could also include on your sample form when you picked the grapes. That's sometimes good to know. Hopefully you're not leaving them sitting around for a few days, but if the VA levels are a titch high, maybe it's because they've been sitting around for a few days. So things like that, we just help us do the data interpretation. So I think that's about it. Francisco, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Hayley. Very good, your presentation and informative, just to show of how you're working and how to proceed. And thank you very much to make this effort to put in the cooler in Centerville. So again, we have the icon of Q&A if somebody has questions. I had one, Hayley. What happens if people, instead of bringing you the berries, want to crush by their own the juice?
That is also fine. If you want to crush it by yourself, that's great. That saves a step. Ideally, please bring me about 100 mils of crushed juice. Don't refrigerate it. Keep it cool, but don't refrigerate it. We don't want the organic acids to start falling out of solution. The same goes for your grapes. Don't throw them in the fridge. Keep them cool, but not refrigerated. So that will lead to better results, more consistent.
Okay. Do you prefer a plastic, a glass package? Doesn't matter?
Doesn't really matter. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. Plastic is probably preferred just because A, it's lighter, and B, I can recycle. Well, you can recycle the plastic too. Just make sure it's well sealing and it's not going to leak all over the place. That's important. Nobody, like, the lab is sticky enough this time of year. I don't need to swirl around.
Okay. And last but not least, what happens if somebody wants to bring you bunches?
Bunches are also fine. They just take me a little bit more work. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember if we charged a fee for destemming last year. I know some of the other labs I know one of the ones in Quebec, I think, charges a higher rate for crushing and destemming. But I think if you're bringing me bunches of grapes, you're going to have to bring a bunch more in order to get a representative sample rather than picking off individual clusters down your vineyard. So it's probably better for you to pick throughout the vineyard rather than just give me like 4 or 5 clusters.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Hayley, for all your time, your explanation. I think it's quite clear how to proceed. And well, your contact information is on the webpage. So
Yep. And happy to hear from anybody.
perfect. Thank you very much, Hayley. So now we are moving forward to the last part of our session, which is a discussion between the president of GIGANS, Steve Ells, and this time I'm very glad to see somebody else. One moment, we have one question from Sharon. Question for Steve. Does GIGANS have a set of recommendations for COVID precautions for grape pickers that will be recommended so we can all be consistent and have a guidelines resources?
So GIGANs themselves haven't put out any guidelines. I know the Federation of Agriculture has put out some basic harvest guidelines, and I would encourage you to look at the Federation website. It's a good resource for all the COVID material. We didn't go down that road just because every vineyard's different and every winery's different, and it's pretty different row spacings. There's too many different variables for us to really get involved in that. Certainly encourage everyone to be careful. We're outside, which is a real positive, but no, we didn't set a standard set of recommendations. And yeah, I can, Federation is just Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture. They have a great website. So that's, I'm sure we can send out some links to that. We've set out links in the past to the Federation. So they should be there, but we can send them out again.
Yeah. We will be discussing, Sharon, also about this topic right now. So to know how it's working and proceeding the growers. So again, we are going now to the discussion. I'm very glad to have this time Becca with us. Welcome, Becca.
Hi, thanks, Francisco.
So for this time, we will be touching base a couple of topics after veraison, what to do after veraison, something before harvest, including the preparation for this situation with COVID, and finally, the importance to be communicating with the winery. So I know we are slightly delayed to talk about after veraison. It has been many things passing through, but anyway, I would like to touch base about it. So I would like to start with you, Becca. Mm-hmm. Usually, when you're reaching veraison, how are you proceeding? What are you doing?
I'd like to say, in terms of best practices, it doesn't feel like any year in the last few years has been a great best practice year for us. I'm not sure how the other growers feel, but this year I know we were, for one, shorthanded in terms of labor, like all of us, and then had a lot of equipment issues. So it wasn't an ideal year, but I don't know if there's such thing in farming. But in terms of around veraison, a couple things would be, I'd like to get on my pre-bunch closure spray of botrytis spray and calcium. Try to get leaf removal done if it hasn't been done already. You want to do that before veraison, before the berries get soft. If you're doing it by machine, because you could go through and do some damage to your fruit. And something I was doing last week was because I noticed at the top of our hill at Gaspereau that some of the flow off of the hill was getting trapped in the ditch and then kind of leaching through the vineyard, posing issues. So I did a lot of ditching last week, which I haven't done in a while, but it was amazing the difference it did, considering that there's prediction of maybe a wet fall, which wouldn't surprise us because that's usually how it goes. I want to get the rain out of the vineyard as fast as possible, especially this year where we haven't had a lot of precipitation. The berries are still quite, small, so we could have the threat of splitting and then subsequent issues, botrytis and that kind of thing. So those are just some of the things right off the top of my head. Right now I'm already in harvest mode, so I've veraison, when was that? It just feels like the season's gone by so fast. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, a lot the same with us. We think about that last spray, you know, we want to get the last kind of round of fungicides on, last botrytis spray on at veraison or just after veraison, kind of different. So the hybrids, we don't worry quite so much about that. That would kind of be a bunch closure for the last botrytis spray. With the vinifera, especially Chardonnay, we'd be in there kind of midway through veraison, probably put the last botrytis spray on, but we'd also put calcium and potassium on at the same time. Foliar potassium will help build the sugars. So especially with those kind of long range ones, the Chardonnay, the Pinot, Riesling, Cab, we try to do a botrytis, 1 or 2 botrytis sprays kind of at veraison and through veraison. So with that for sure. And yeah, kind of getting the vineyard ready for harvest, start thinking about raccoon fencing going up and the bird netting and dusting the whaler off and all that stuff. So yeah, it's quite a process to get ready for harvest.
What's your main botrytis spray that you kind of depend on? Do you mix it up?
We mix it up. I don't like to do anything too much. Mostly we're using biologicals, organic products. We don't do 100%. We're a bit of a blended approach on that. So yeah, the later ones we tend to go more with the biologicals. So Serenade Opti, I like to use Serenade Opti, kind of that later one. Serafel is a new one. I mean, that I think we're seeing some success with, and it's coming in that it is the tests are showing it is more effective on botrytis, and it's the last one I put on was actually Serafel. I liked that it kind of hits all the main things we're worried about right now, and it mixes well with the calcium and the potassium, so there's no worries there. So, and no harvest date. So I mean, if you're worried about the weather and you see a little problem, maybe you can go in there and just spray spots with that. So yeah, that's kind of where we were on that.
I was banking on Seraph a little bit too. That was my last spray. And some of the varieties that I tend to see, you know, some botrytis pop up no matter the year. I haven't seen any, so so far so good.
Yeah, I think.
Question right now that I would like to ask. So sorry, Steve, because you mentioned already the raccoons. So Bernie's asking, I have a raccoon that is crossing a crater net tested, 1,000 volts at lowest point, and reaching through side netting that is well clipped. Is there anything else to try besides trapping or killing? For Steve and Becca, please.
I know we trap and relocate. So we don't have any fencing or anything up, but so far we found that pretty effective. And Cool Ranch Doritos seem to be their favorite.
Yeah, I've so making sure your fence is clear is a big thing. If you have a lot of pressure and you've got the raccoon fence up, to make sure it's clear that there's no branches or trees touching it. I like to walk them all every 2 or 3 days to make sure nothing's falling down on them. The grass isn't the wet grass from the morning dews haven't come up on it to short it down and reduce the voltage. I mean, that's pretty tough. I know there's some pretty smart raccoons out there that I've seen videos of them actually helping each other get over fences so they're not touching it. So they're a tough one. So if you've got a really smart one, I would suggest trapping.
Okay, so now passing this part of preparing or after veraison, a couple of activities. Now, because Becca, you already mentioned that you're thinking harvest. So which are your considerations before this process?
So I just finished preparing my waiver that I have our pickers sign every day. And a big aspect of that was getting the COVID guidelines that we want to put into place for this season and likely, for seasons to come. So that was done today, along with, I prepare like an information sheet that I send out to everybody in an email beforehand. So it gives them an idea of what they're going to be getting into if they haven't worked for us before. So that's all completed. So just communicating with our previous pickers and our new pickers, that's a big thing. And then just preparation on site. So having bins cleaned and ready to go, buckets, clippers, gloves, pallets of water, the gamut. You want to have everything ready to go because we're thinking, I mean, we'll probably be starting Monday. So, and once we start, it's just, we don't really have time to stock up on everything. So it's just getting everything ready. And we have a few days between our last task and when we start to pick. So I have my crew going through right now and deleafing anywhere needed. If I didn't have a chance to get through with the leaf remover, it's better obviously for quality and just to get the airflow in there. But it also makes it so much faster if you're hand harvesting to have those clusters right there and visible. Yeah, so those are the main things that we're doing right now and just keeping an eye on the weather and sampling. I did my first big sample today of everything. And so that's Brix, pH, and TA. The TA on some of them is still pretty high, but it's dropping as I would have expected on the Muscat, New York Muscat, that's getting down to about 8 grams per liter TA. So that's going to be on the chopping block soon because we don't want to have it go down to 5 grams per liter, which we've seen it done before. So now that we're getting cool nights, that's a bit better, but with those warm nights that we were having for quite a period of time, didn't fare well for the acid. But now that things are starting to cool off, maybe we'll see more gradual progression of the acid drop. So.
Becca, we received a question from Sharon. Could you share those sheets and waivers with vegans for other growers too, please?
Yeah, I can share. See, mine is kind of a legal document that I made up myself. I'll send through the precautions, like the general just COVID precautions, but I won't send through our company's guidelines in entirety.
Absolutely. Thank you, Becca.
Yep.
And Steve, which preparation are you doing for
Well, we're certainly testing the grapes for doing samples, and we send some of the samples to Alab and some to the winery itself. They have their own lab, so the winery doesn't charge us for the tests, and Alab does. So there's a few more go to the winery, but certainly the pre-harvest ones we send to Alab. So yeah, we're getting ready. We're sharpening up all the pruners and. We set up this year. One of the things we're doing is setting up a wash station. We always have a porta potty in the close to where we're picking, but this year we're setting up a bit of a wash station with lots of hand sanitizer and water and soap and paper towel to dry hands and stuff. So we're trying to do that. We'll certainly go over with everyone kind of on a verbal basis instead of a contractor sheet waiver, but yeah, we're getting ready with that. So then we're also in contact with the winery. So where we send our grapes, there's 2 or 3 different products that they make from even the same variety. So, and then we deal with 2 different wineries. So we have to know what they want. Like we have Lacadie that we're going to start picking tomorrow. That's going for one purpose. But we also have a block of Lacadie going to another winery that will probably hang for another, I'm saying 8 to 14 days. So they're planted beside each other, but just different purposes. The wineries want different things out of them. They want different Brix levels, different TA levels. So you have to be really aware. You can't just say, this is ready to pick. You have to be aware what the winemaker wants to do with it. So I think that's something we're in talks right now with all of our different blocks of grapes and where the tests are showing they are. We're trying to make a plan, how harvest is going to happen for each of the different products. I mean, we're already looking at, we're picking one block of Pinot that's probably going to hang, where the rest of it will come off probably not too long for now for sparkling. So yeah, it's really good to make a plan. And I think the winery, the winemaker, the wine rep, whoever you're talking to has to be involved in that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Becca, what would you like to say to complement that?
No, it's very important with the communication for disease pressure, pest pressure. So if you're seeing issues, to let the winery know so they can make a decision. I know within our company, we kind of monitor how ripening's going, how the aromatics are playing out, just in the acid, of course, because we often harvest on the acid and not so much the Brix. So then we allocate those to the different portfolios of the wine. So it's almost like an ongoing process. It's not kind of set and dry. We have an idea when we get into the harvest, but you never really know how things are going to play out. So it's we sample weekly until we get to more, until we start to pick, and then it could be daily, just as we need to know. So just communication with your winery is huge. And sending them, if they can't get out to try to sample your grapes, if you can get a sample to them, just so you can they can taste. That's the most important thing, to see how the grapes are tasting.
Okay, thank you, Becca. Yeah, very good information. Communication is crucial, just to make your life easier as well. So to schedule when to process everything and pass to the winemaking part. So thank you very much. I think, Steve, these were the three main topics that we wanted to touch in this session.
Yep. I found interesting when Neslihan was talking about the field sampling and everything, and I know we do that as the grapes get riper. That's more enjoyable. The first few aren't always too enjoyable. One of the things that struck me, and maybe you wanted to comment on this, Becca, and maybe Neslihan too, is one of the things we go by a lot is the seed, and the color of the seed, if it's starting to turn brown, is a great sign that they are getting a little closer, and how crunchy the seed is.
Crunchy, yeah.
And I mean, Neslihan talked about the tannins from the seed, and I know we always want the seed crunchy, but we want it to taste like an almond instead of something bitter. We don't want the bitterness on the taste on the seed. We want the almost little crunchy little almond taste. And you probably find that too, Becca. Is that?
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
It's pretty. Yeah, I think that's a pretty common thing to go by.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, especially for the red wines, if you will do some red wine making.
Sit in the seeds.
Yeah.
Okay, so Steve, I think we were complete with the fifth session of the season.
Fifth session already. We made it.
Yes.
Good luck, everybody.
And they're only getting better.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'd
good harvest.
I'd really like to wish everyone a good harvest, and thanks for joining in. Thanks for all the presenters today. This is a big crowd we've had. I think this is the biggest crowd of presenters we've had yet. So, great session. Thanks to everyone for your input. Hope everyone has a good harvest, and we'll see you again later in the year. Thanks very much.